What if I told you that the moment the world thought Lewis Hamilton simply made a mistake in Las Vegas qualifying was actually hiding a chain of events that no camera captured, and that completely changed the outcome of his night? You saw him finish in the 20th position, but you did not see the critical detail. In the middle of the rain and the spray, during his preparation lap, Hamilton hit a track cone that may have become lodged beneath the floor and destabilized the Ferrari SF25 at the exact moment he needed maximum grip. And when the session reached its final seconds, a second blow arrived. Miscommunication on the radio led Hamilton to believe the session had ended, causing him to abort the only lap that could have saved him from elimination, even as the team insisted he still had time to continue. Stay right here, because once you understand how the cones strike, the tire temperature collapse, the radio confusion, and the cold asphalt combined into the perfect storm, you will realize why Hamilton's worst qualifying in more than 360 attempts was far more complex than a simple driver error. The Las Vegas qualifying session began under heavy rain that transformed the circuit into one of the most unpredictable surfaces of the entire season. The cold asphalt refused to generate the heat the tires needed, and visibility shrank to a narrow tunnel of spray. Lewis Hamilton entered the session knowing it would be difficult, but the Ferrari SF25 gave him almost no stability from the moment he left the pit lane. The car slid through the opening corners, the front axle never gripped properly, and the rear shifted as if the tires were falling out of their operating window before the lap had even properly started. Nothing about the first run suggested that Hamilton had the machinery to fight for a competitive position. As he completed his first-time laps, the intensity of the rain only magnified the Ferrari's weaknesses. The front of the car refused to bite into the apexes, and the rear lost traction as soon as Hamilton applied throttle. Engineers watching the telemetry saw tire temperatures dropping instead of rising, a direct sign that the car was unable to build the thermal load required to sustain grip. This effect created a downward spiral where every correction induced more heat loss, and every moment of heat loss made the next corner more unstable. Hamilton was wrestling a car that offered no consistency, and the conditions punished him each time he attempted to push harder. The most decisive moment occurred during a preparation lap when Hamilton struck a cone that had been dislodged earlier in the session. Because of the spray, he never saw it coming. The impact looked insignificant from outside, but for a ground effect car, the underside is the most sensitive aerodynamic region. The Ferrari relies on clean airflow beneath its floor to generate downforce, especially in the wet when mechanical grip is limited. If that airflow is disturbed, the aerodynamic platform can collapse instantly. Hamilton continued the lap without realizing what had happened, but the behavior of the SF25 deteriorated immediately afterward, raising suspicion about whether the floor's geometry had been compromised. When Hamilton attempted to build up for his final lap, the car felt even more unstable. The tires were colder than before, the downforce was inconsistent, and the rear stepped out whenever he tried to accelerate through medium speed sections. Engineers could see clear signs that the car was losing aerodynamic load in the parts of the circuit where ground effect normally supports the chassis. The combination of cold tires and potential underfloor disturbance created a perfect storm. Hamilton's steering corrections grew larger with every corner, evidence that he was fighting not just the rain, but a fundamental imbalance in the car's structure. Then came the moment that sealed his fate. As he moved into position for what should have been his final push lap, Hamilton believed the session had ended. Radio messages between driver and team became unclear at the worst possible time. Hamilton slowed, thinking the opportunity was gone, while the pit wall insisted he still had time to continue. That hesitation cost him the chance to start his only fully prepared flying lap. In qualifying sessions that unfold under extreme conditions, a single moment of miscommunication can destroy a driver's entire night. For Hamilton, that moment happened at the exact time he needed clarity most. By the time the checkered flag appeared, Hamilton found himself in the 20th position. It was a result that stunned the paddock not because of a single mistake, but because of the sequence of events that built up through the session. The rain erased tire temperature. The cone's strike may have compromised the aerodynamic floor. The car refused to stabilize. And a communication error prevented Hamilton from attempting a lap that could have rescued him. The cameras showed a driver finishing last. But the truth, hidden beneath the spray and the confusion, revealed a far more complex story that no one watching at home had the chance to see. The core problem Hamilton faced in Las Vegas qualifying was not a single mistake, but a collapsing sequence of conditions that made competitive driving nearly impossible. From the moment he entered the track, the Ferrari SF25 struggled to generate tire temperature on the cold and saturated asphalt. The rain flattened the grip level to near zero, and every attempt to build heat was immediately erased as the tires cooled on the straights. Hamilton felt the front end drifting through the early corners before the rear stepped out in places where the car normally feels planted. This behavior signaled an underlying instability that had nothing to do with driver input and everything to do with the car's inability to reach its operating window. As the session progressed, the instability grew more dramatic. The SF25 failed to respond to Hamilton's steering inputs, and the balance shifted unpredictably between understeer and sudden loss of traction. Telemetry confirmed that the tires were cooling consistently through each sector, and with low core temperature, the aerodynamic platform beneath the car weakened further. The downforce generation that Hamilton depends on in the wet simply never materialized. Every effort he made to build a rhythm collapsed as the tires slipped out of the necessary range. This was not a case of overdriving. It was a car refusing to support even basic control. The problem intensified when Hamilton encountered thicker spray and reduced visibility. At that point of a lap, a driver must rely on the car's predictability more than the track surface, yet the SF25 offered none. With the rain increasing, the mechanical grip weakened further, placing even more responsibility on the underbody aerodynamics. But the readings showed that those values were unstable as well. Hamilton described the car drifting without warning, sliding off the optimal line and refusing to anchor itself into slow and medium speed corners. The engineers could only watch the data and see that the temperature curve was moving downward rather than upward, a clear sign that the situation was spiraling out of control. Then came the moment that created the misunderstanding in the global audience, the so-called error. During a preparation lap, hidden behind the spray of the cars ahead, Hamilton struck a cone that had been displaced earlier. The impact happened too quickly for him to react, and because the car did not show an immediate mechanical failure, he continued driving. But the underside of the SF25 is the most sensitive aerodynamic area, and even minor contact can disturb the airflow channels required to generate consistent downforce. From that point forward, the car behaved in a way that mimicked driver error, even though the underlying cause was an aerodynamic disturbance that Hamilton could not see or feel directly. As Hamilton prepared for what should have been his final timed lap, the car's instability made any improvement unlikely. The tires were colder, the visibility was worse, and the aerodynamic platform beneath the car delivered inconsistent levels of load. Hamilton fought the car through the opening corners, but the SF25 responded with delayed steering reaction and unpredictable traction. This created the visual impression of a mistake, yet the deeper data told a different story. The car lacked the stability necessary for a proper qualifying lap, regardless of the driver's technique. The conditions had exposed every structural weakness of the Ferrari at once. By the time Hamilton crossed the line and saw himself placed in the 20th position, the narrative of a simple driver error dissolved under the weight of the evidence. The rain robbed him of tire temperature. The cold asphalt erased his ability to recover it. The aerodynamic platform struggled even before the cone strike. And once that impact occurred, the car became nearly undrivable. What spectators interpreted as error was actually the outcome of a car that offered zero support in the most demanding conditions of the season. The truth was hidden behind the spray, the weather, and the timing screens, and this module reveals the reality behind the moment the world misunderstood. Ferrari's engineering team began the post-session analysis, convinced that Hamilton's struggles could not be explained by wet conditions alone. Even in heavy rain, a driver of his caliber does not fall to the 20th position unless the car suffers a deeper structural issue. The first signal came from the tire temperature trace. Throughout every run, the temperatures dropped steadily instead of rising, which indicated that the SF25 was failing to generate the vertical load required to keep heat in the rubber. Without tire temperature, a ground effect car cannot produce stable downforce. This created the first layer of instability long before the decisive moments of the session unfolded. When the team expanded the investigation, they compared Hamilton's data to the rest of the grid, and the discrepancy was extraordinary. The SF25 was losing heat almost twice as quickly as its competitors on identical portions of the lap. That pointed to a problem in aerodynamic load distribution, because without a stable underbody airflow, the tires do not experience consistent pressure. In wet conditions, this effect becomes even stronger since mechanical grip is already reduced. Everything Hamilton described through the radio matched the numbers. The front lacked bite, the rear slid unpredictably, and the balance changed with every shift in water depth across the circuit. The cone impact became the turning point of the investigation. After reviewing footage and telemetry, the engineers noticed that Hamilton's instability worsened dramatically in the exact lap following the contact. Because ground effect cars rely on smooth, undisturbed airflow beneath the floor, any strike to the lower surface can disrupt pressure channels, reduce suction, and collapse the aerodynamic platform. Once the team inspected the underside of the SF-25, they found marks that aligned perfectly with the location where a cone could have hit the car. It was not catastrophic damage, but even a small deformation can change how air flows through the floor's tunnels. Ferrari then compared the pre-impact and post-impact aerodynamic data, and the difference was unmistakable. Before hitting the cone, the SF-25 was unstable, but at least predictable. After the impact, downforce values fluctuated with much greater amplitude, and the car showed signs of vertical oscillation where the floor should have remained steady. This told the engineers that the airflow beneath the car had become turbulent, meaning the aerodynamic platform no longer generated consistent pressure. In a wet session, this type of disturbance becomes devastating because the tires already lack mechanical grip and depend heavily on aerodynamic load to keep the car planted. Another revealing detail came from Hamilton's steering telemetry. Before the impact, he was making controlled micro-corrections. Afterward, his steering movements became larger and more reactive, a clear sign that the car was losing stability mid-corner. Engineers linked this directly to the disruption in airflow beneath the floor. Once the pressure channels were compromised, the rear axle no longer responded proportionally to Hamilton's inputs. The car either under-rotated or snapped too quickly, forcing him to improvise through sections of the circuit where precision is essential. This pattern explained why the lap looked erratic from the outside, even though the root cause was structural, not driver-induced. By the time Ferrari completed the full post-session review, Vasseur understood that Hamilton's struggles were the result of 3 converging problems. The tires never reached the correct temperature. The aerodynamic platform weakened progressively under the rain. And the cone strike created a pressure imbalance that destroyed what little stability the SF-25 had left. This combination turned the car into a machine that reacted unpredictably to every input. In these conditions, the so-called qualifying error was not a matter of misjudgment. It was the inevitable outcome of a car compromised in ways no driver could identify from the cockpit, revealing a truth far more complex than the simple narrative that emerged after the session.